Okay, let's set aside faith for a second. Let's put religion on the shelf. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to take one of the biggest ideas in human history and put it through a philosophical stress test. This isn't about belief, it's about pure logic. The question is simple. If there's an ultimate source of reality, is it one or is it many? Let's get into it.
So yeah, that question right there, that's the heart of the whole thing. It's the puzzle that philosophers, thinkers, and probably just about everyone has wrestled with for centuries. I mean, if you get right down to it, what is the bedrock of existence? Is it a single, unified thing? Or is it more like a collection of different forces working together? One or many?
Now, before we can even begin to tackle the one versus many debate, we've got to face the first major hurdle. It's a big one, thrown at us by skeptics. The question is, does the whole idea of a single, ultimate cause even hold up to logical scrutiny? Like, is it a coherent idea to begin with? Okay, to figure that out, we need to pull out a special tool from the philosopher's toolkit. It's this concept called a necessary being. And look, this isn't just some random thing. Think of it as the ultimate buck stops here reality. It's the thing that has to exist, that can't not exist. It doesn't need a cause because it exists by its own nature. And it's the fundamental reason why everything else, you, me, this planet, the whole shebang, is here at all. All right, so here comes the first punch from the skeptic's corner. The entire concept of a necessary being leans on this big assumption called the principle of sufficient reason. Basically, it just says that everything has a reason, or an explanation. But is that really true? Skeptics love to point to the weird world of quantum physics, where it looks like some things, some events, just pop into existence without a direct, predictable cause. So they ask a really fair question. What if some things just happen? No reason, no explanation. But whoa, the comeback from philosophers is pretty powerful. They argue that if you throw out the whole idea of explanations, you're basically giving up on rational thought itself. I mean, what is science if not a giant hunt for explanations? And they'll point out that even quantum physics doesn't say there's no reason. It just gives us probabilistic reasons, which is still a kind of explanation. So to just say some things have no reason, well, that's a huge claim. It's like saying the universe is fundamentally irrational. And if you're going to make a claim that big, the burden of proof is kind of on you, right? Okay, so let's just say for the sake of argument, we accept it. We agree that there has to be an ultimate explanation for everything. Fine, but that immediately leads to the next level of this puzzle. Why just one? What's to stop reality from having, say, two necessary beings, or 100, or 1,000,000 of them, all coexisting?
This is where things get really cool and a bit mind-bending. A philosopher named Leibniz came up with this clever bit of logic. Let's walk through it together. So for you to have two of anything, two chairs, two planets, they have to be different in some way, right? There has to be some property that one has and the other doesn't. Okay, now apply that to our two necessary beings. Is the property that makes them different a necessary property? Well, if it's necessary, then by definition, both of them would have to have it. So they wouldn't be different after all. Okay, so what if the difference is a contingent property, something they just happen to have? Well, a truly necessary being can't have just happens to have properties. Its nature is, well, necessary. So you see the problem? A second necessary being ends up being a logical impossibility. It just doesn't compute. And that leads to this really powerful, simple conclusion. Necessity implies uniqueness. If something is truly necessary, there can only be one of it. The very concept just doesn't allow for duplicates. Okay, but there's one more big objection from this skeptical point of view, and honestly, it's a pretty intuitive one. Maybe we're overthinking all this. Maybe we don't need to look for some cause outside the universe. What if the universe itself is the necessary being? The whole cosmos, all of space, time, matter, and energy, what if that's the eternal, uncaused thing we've been looking for? But here's the problem. When philosophers actually put the universe we observe up against the job description for a necessary being, they just don't match up. I mean, look at the universe. It's made of parts, right? Galaxies, stars, atoms. A necessary being is supposed to be simple, not composite. The universe is constantly changing and evolving. A necessary being, by its nature, would have to be unchanging. Our universe depends on its past states and operates by physical laws that seem like they could have been different. A necessary being has to be totally independent. So the resume just doesn't fit the job. The properties are all wrong. All right, so we've made it through the first gauntlet of objections. Phew. But now we pivot to a whole different kind of challenge. This is the polytheist objection. What if the divine reality isn't a solo act at all? What if it's a team sport. And you gotta admit, this is a really compelling idea, one that's been around forever in human history, the thought that maybe reality is governed by a committee of gods. Not one single architect, but a whole team of divine engineers, one in charge of the oceans, another in charge of the sky, all working together to keep the cosmos running. But from a purely philosophical standpoint, the idea of a committee starts to raise some flags. Think about what a committee actually means. It implies a division of labor, right? It means each member is limited. They only have their own piece of the puzzle. It means they're dependent on each other to get the job done. And most importantly, it means they're all operating under some kind of shared set of rules or principles to coordinate their actions. And if that's the case, then none of them can be the truly ultimate reality. And that leads us right to the heart of the counterargument. If there's a committee of gods, what explains the committee itself? What are the rules that govern them? What's the shared law or principle that allows them all to work together instead of descending into chaos? You see where this is going, right? Whatever that higher unifying principle is, that starts to look a lot more like the actual ultimate reality. It always seems to point back to a single source.
Okay, but here's another angle on this. You could argue, hey, wait a minute. Who said divinity has to be perfect and ultimate? I mean, just look at ancient myths. The gods in so many of those stories were incredibly powerful, for sure, but they were also flawed. They had egos, they made mistakes, they were limited. They were more like super-powered beings within the world, not some abstract principle standing outside. And this is where philosophers make a really crucial distinction. They would say, sure, those kinds of beings could exist, but we need to be clear about our terms. Those are gods with a lowercase g. They're powerful, but they're still part of the system. They are contingent. The concept of God with a capital G that we're stress testing here is something different. It's the ultimate, necessary ground of reality itself. It's not a player in the game, it's the source of the game's rules.
So where does that leave us? We've run this idea through the gauntlet of atheist objections and polytheist objections, and through that process, a few key arguments for divine unity, for oneness, really start to crystallize. Let's pull it all together and look at the main pillars of this case.
First step, necessity means uniqueness. We already saw this with Leibniz's law. If a being is truly necessary, without any extra, non-essential parts, you just can't make a copy. Any supposed copy would be identical in every single way, which means it wouldn't be a second thing at all. It would just be the same thing.
Pillar number 2, the ultimate explanation has to be singular. Think about it. If you're looking for the final complete explanation for why anything and everything exists, logic just keeps pushing you back and back until you hit a single all-encompassing source. A committee of causes just feels like an incomplete answer.
Third, maximal greatness can't be duplicated. This one comes from thinkers like Plantina. If you define a being as maximally great, as perfect as can be, then there can't be two of them. Why not? Because for them to be two distinct beings, they'd have to differ in some way, and any difference at all would mean one has a quality the other lacks, meaning one is less than maximally great. It's a contradiction.
And finally, the fourth pillar, perfection excludes plurality. This is a classic one. The argument is that true, absolute perfection means having no limits or boundaries. But the second you introduce another, separate being, you've created a distinction. You've created this and a that. You've introduced a relationship, and therefore you've introduced limitation. So the very idea of more than one is seen as a contradiction to the idea of absolute perfection.
So after all that, after running this idea through the logical grinder, where do we land? What's the bottom line that this philosophical stress test seems to give us? Well, it leaves us with a conclusion that is really powerful, but also very specific and conditional. Notice, this whole line of reasoning doesn't claim to prove that a necessary, maximally great reality actually exists. What it does claim is this. If such a reality exists, one that has all those properties we've been talking about, then it logically has to be one. It has to be singular. But that leaves us with one final, huge question to chew on. Is this incredibly elegant, powerful logic telling us something fundamental about the nature of reality itself? Or is it just revealing something fundamental about the nature of our own minds? Are we just projecting our own deep-seated need for unity, for simplicity, for a single, neat answer onto the cosmos? In other words, is this whole exercise a map that leads us to the truth of the universe? Or is it a mirror, just showing us the structure of our own reason? And that is something to think about. Thanks for diving into this with me.